Crime dramas make it seem like cops always get the bad guy. On the contrary, there's a long list of active serial killers out there. You might be familiar with the likes of Jack the Ripper and Zodiac Killer, but it's the recent ones you gotta watch out for. In this video, we're looking at the top 3 active serial killers in 2022. One could actually be a police officer, so stay tuned. The Long Island Killer. Shannan Gilbert's grave in Amityville Cemetery lies 8 miles from where she went missing in May of 2010 after visiting a client at Oak Beach, a spit of sand dotted with holiday homes on New York's Long Island. Gilbert's final resting place has a simple headstone at the back of the cemetery inscribed with her dates October 24, 1986 to December 13, 2011. It speaks to the enduring mystery of how she, along with 10 or more other women, ended up dead in the same area, most of whom were sex workers. In late 2010, 4 bodies were discovered from the desolate stretch of beach on the coast of Long Island. All 4 women were revealed to have been escorts and/or prostitutes who had advertised their services on the classified advertisements website Craigslist. The remains of each woman were found stuffed into individual rotting burlap sacks, and autopsies later revealed all the women had died of strangulation. Such a gruesome string of crimes was essentially unheard of on Long Island. As the authorities continued and widened the scope of their search, their grime discoveries continued to increase. In late March and early April of 2011, an additional 4 bodies were found. One about a mile east of where the first 4 were located, and 3 more on the north side of the highway several miles further down. The police went public with a statement announcing that the murders were all the work of a single killer. The so-called Long Island serial killer case remains unsolved, and according to Rolling Stone, some have placed the blame squarely on the shoulders of the Suffolk County Police Department. Reports and rumors of corruption have come up amid the department's failure to bring the killer to justice, with some suggesting that it went unsolved because higher-ups in the police department didn't want the truth to come to light. That's even the basis of the Discovery Plus series called Unraveled: Long Island Serial Killer. Whatever the truth is, it's entirely possible that one day it will still come out. One of the suspects is former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke. He was rumored to have had relations with local sex workers before, potentially putting him in circumstances where he might have crossed paths with Shannan Gilbert. However, no charges have been brought against Burke, and he has never been considered an official suspect in the case. James Bissett, a co-worker of the Long Island nursery, was a major supplier of burlap sacks to the area, and just days after Gilbert's remains were found, Bissett died by suicide. There was never a formal investigation into whether or not he was responsible for Gilbert's death or any of the victims related to the case, but he remains a point of curiosity for those interested in figuring it out. Chicago Strangler. Back in 2019, the Chicago Tribune reported that police were assigned a designated task force to investigate the theory that there was a serial killer stalking the city. For many, it was an investigation that was long overdue. It came more than a year after the news outlets had run another story connecting the deaths of at least 75 women who had been killed. Yes, you heard that right, 75. And they were all killed via suffocation or strangulation between the years of 2001 and 2017. The initial story ran in 2018. And even as law enforcement balked at the idea of a serial killer, 4 more women turned up dead in the same manner. All the women were found dumped after being killed in Chicago's South and West Side neighborhoods, usually in abandoned buildings or alleyways. They were also killed in a brutal fashion. Some victims were sexually abused and beaten, others were bound and gagged. Some of the women had plastic bags tied over their heads. Most were stripped of their clothing, some were even set on fire. At the time, police were still refusing to say that there was a serial killer at work in Chicago, but did ultimately admit that it was a distinct possibility. While they claimed there was little concrete evidence to link the victims, the Tribune reported that others had seen a very large link. Most of the victims were black women, almost 3/4, and about 47% had a history of sex work. Yet despite the violence and frequency of these murders, few had elicited much media attention. Fast forward to late 2021, and that's when the 3-part documentary series called The Hunt for the Chicago Strangler started streaming on Discovery+. Though it offers no definitive conclusions, the documentary did bring attention to the lives of the women whose deaths were largely ignored. At the time of the show's debut, Chicago police were still saying nothing to confirm or deny the existence of a serial killer, and at the same time, PBS says activists were demanding answers. To Thomas Hargrove, founder of the Murder Accountability Program, MAP, the murders in Chicago are more than random violence. They're the work of a single killer. The Chicago Strangler could certainly be an individual serial killer. Hargrove has even suggested a name, Darren Dion Van. Van strangled multiple women in Gary, Indiana, and dumped their bodies in abandoned buildings before his arrest in 2014. He even told police that he killed people in Illinois. However, at this time, there's no connection between him and the 51 murders in Chicago. But it is also possible that Chicago has something much worse than a serial killer. It's also possible that the city has merely let the murders of 50 women go unsolved for more than 2 decades. West Mesa murders. At first, it was like any other Monday night, but February 2nd, 2009 would stick with Christine Ross forever. Ross walked her dog Ruka along a dried-out wash in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's where Ruka found a bone resembling a femur. Ross would soon discover that 11 dead bodies, now known as the West Mesa murders, lay beneath. The Albuquerque Journal calls Central Avenue a high-crime area and adds that's how it all started way back in 2001. It was the most disturbing murder case Albuquerque police had ever seen, and it remains unsolved to this day. When the collection of the bodies was discovered in the desert, it wasn't just the number of bodies that were found that stunned investigators, but the way in which they were buried. The bodies of women were found not in a single mass grave, but rather they were found scattered across a desolate, empty plot of land. Because of this, it took law enforcement officials quite some time to recover all the bodies. Then they started the arduous process of identifying each of them, quickly coming to the realization that many of them had been missing for years. It took nearly a year for medical examiners to identify the decomposing victims, most of whom were Hispanic and all of whom were female. Reported missing between 2001 and 2005, they ranged in age from 15 to 32. All the victims of the so-called West Mesa bone collector weren't identified for another 11 years. Ultimately, 11 women and 1 unborn child were found and identified. Their life stories were varied. While many had connections to the drug and sex trade, others did not. Zelania Edwards was just 15 years old when she disappeared, and it was 22-year-old Michelle Valdez who was pregnant when she was killed and buried in the New Mexico desert. Although hundreds of people were interviewed and suspects were investigated, the idea of the West Mesa bone collector remains a mystery. One of the suspects was Lorenzo Montoya, who had a rather suspicious criminal background. He not only lived near the burial site, but he was arrested in 1999 for attempting to strangle a prostitute that he picked up and taken to a secluded area. In 2006, Montoya died after the boyfriend of another prostitute, Shurik Hill, murdered him. Montoya had hired Hill and then tied her up and strangled her. But when she didn't emerge from Montoya's home at the time she said she would, her boyfriend, whom she brought with her, approached the house and killed Montoya in self-defense. Suspiciously, the West Mesa murders stopped after Montoya was killed, leading the authorities to conclude that he may have been the killer. However, the investigation into the West Mesa murder is still ongoing. According to the city of Albuquerque, there is a $100,000 reward being offered for information about the bone collector. Which one of these serial killers do you think is still roaming around? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and hit the bell and subscribe icons to get your regular dose of whodunits. See you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and don't get any crazy ideas.